Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. One thing we've learned about mass immigration over the past couple of years is that all good people support it. Immigration is the ultimate moral litmus test. When a caravan of poor migrants from the third world, in other words, obey or we'll kill you. Jumaane Williams is a New York City councilman who joins us tonight. Mr. Williams, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So there's something admirable about the straightforwardness from our old friend, Congressman Swalwell. If you don't obey, we'll just kill you. What do you think of that?
Come on, Tucker, we all have to get to a place where we can have a conversation about what's happening in this country.
Yeah.
And have a respectable one. So,
do you think threatening people with violence is a good way to get to that
no,
place?
I don't think that's the good way to have a conversation, nor do I think having a conversation about guns not being part of the problem is a good way to have a conversation. So we should start with guns are a part of the problem and figure out how to deal with it.
Okay, but when a sitting U.S. and by the way, we know Swalwell very well. Sure. I personally like him. We asked him to come on to respond directly. I should say that. But when a sitting U.S. congressman says, you know, if you don't like it, if you're going to resist in any way, we'll just drop your nuclear weapons on you. We don't even threaten our martial enemies with that. I mean, that's a bit much, no?
Well, first I was remiss, prayers and peace of comfort for the victims of the Chicago mass shooting. But like the mother of a victim that happened in California who said she was tired of prayers, she wanted action. We have to have actionable items. And so I don't consider nukes on people who have guns an actionable item. But there are actionable items. And
so you are the moderate for the first time.
I don't know about the moderate.
Well, you're against killing American citizens. So that's
a moderate.
That puts you in the moderate category. So let me just ask you this. So here's my confusion. I have no problem trying to disarm people who are threatening. The problem I have with gun confiscation is that it punishes people like me who pose no threat at all, and many millions of other Americans who have no criminal record, no intent to harm anybody, want guns for self-defense. And it says to them, you're a criminal now because you have a gun that we think
you
have
scary. Jumped to confiscation.
Well, but no, Eric Swalwell, who's a member of the Intel Committee, is a
but we should have
member.
A conversation about, one, is there an issue with guns in this country, and what do we do with that? And the actionable items are quite clear. One, we can address loopholes in assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Two, we can deal with dealers who have been unscrupulous.
Okay.
And three, we can begin to treat guns like we do cars. That's just on the demand side.
But okay.
I mean, on the supply
I'll
side.
Address that. I mean,
has
look,
to be on the demand
you
side
have
as
members
well.
of Congress, at least one prominent member of Congress, saying we're going to take your guns away by force. Okay. So apparently you're not calling for that, though. We both know you're secretly for that. But
we don't both know that, but okay.
Okay, but I believe you're for that. I believe
you
many
can believe what you like. I'm here to have a discussion.
Are you for that?
On the issue? No. Listen, we should have a discussion.
Okay, then let's talk about magazines.
Sure.
You say high capacity. I think that means any more than 10. Mm-hmm. If I have a magazine that has 15-round capacity, why is that a threat to anyone?
We have to start with, and I'm repeating this again, with everyone agreeing that guns and the access to guns are an issue in this country.
Well, how about this? I don't agree with that.
You do not.
I think a gun is a tool, and in the hands, like any tool, in the hands of someone with malintent, it's very dangerous.
So I
don't have malintent. So would I be forced to give up any magazines that I had that exceeded the capacity?
I will say this. If a hammer killed 33,000 Americans every single year, we would be screaming and yelling, let's regulate hammers. Guns are only made for killing. What I'm saying is let's at least treat guns how we treat vehicles.
But you're speaking theoretically, and I want to speak tangibly.
I'm speaking specifically.
So there are millions upon millions of so-called high-capacity magazines out there. They're in circulation, tens of millions of them. What do we do with those?
So I mentioned three things. I mentioned dealing with the high-capacity magazines and the assault weapons. I mentioned the loopholes of gun dealers.
Stick with the magazines.
But I mentioned also treating guns like we treat vehicles. That's just on the supply side.
Okay, but I'm sorry to press you for specifics, but since this is what you do, let me press you. There are tens of millions of magazines that fit more than 10 rounds in circulation. Normal people with no criminal records own them. What do we do with them?
I tell you what, in New York City, we're the safest city of guns we've been since 1951. I've been a leading voice in dealing with gun violence in New York City.
Oh, so you won't answer the question. That's why nobody trusts the gun people, because we know that you're gun grabbers because you're not straightforward.
Again, part of the gun violence problem. I asked you this last time.
What would you do with the magazines?
But
is that not a fair question?
But no, we have to start from someplace where we all agree.
No,
but you want to die? We absolutely
tell me
do.
what you think, and then maybe you can convince me.
The way you start, we'll never have a conversation. So I want to start from having a conversation.
You need to lie to me first,
no.
and then, you're not going to answer a straightforward adult question.
Are you?
I'm not lying at all.
No, I'm asking, are you going to answer a straightforward question?
I'll answer any question.
Are guns a part of gun violence in this country?
Well, of course, they're the tool that is used very often to commit
So
violence.
we have to start from that point.
Okay,
Finally,
that's fine.
Thank you
So
for agreeing. Thank you for agreeing.
If I have a high-capacity magazine in my possession, your definition of high capacity, and I don't want to give it up, will you take it from me?
So let's take that one off the table.
Why?
What about the other two?
Wait, why are we
Because
taking
you
that
like
all
to
on?
stick on the one that will prevent the conversation
I like to ask
from
very
going forward.
simple factual
no,
questions
I mentioned
and
three
see if
things.
you're straightforward enough
I mentioned
to answer
three
them.
things. And so the way this happens in government, people present things
But why won't
and we
you
figure
answer
out
that?
because you want to get to a point where people will reject any conversation about dealing with guns.
But I think all of our viewers know where you stand.
No, they
the
don't.
answer is, of course, I'm going to take it from you and
No, they
punish you
don't.
if you don't give it to me.
The fact of the matter is we have less than 5% of the population, and we own over half of civilian guns and 30% of mass shootings. But thank you for agreeing that guns are a part of gun violent problems in America. Next time we have a conversation,
I
we can get to the
always
fix.
say what I think. In contrast to you, I will say.
I always say what I think as well.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having
Appreciate
me.
it. Colion Noir is an NRA TV host, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Noir, thanks a lot very much for coming on. So I'm starting to get the sense that confiscation, clearly the goal, because there's no other goal that makes sense. You can't, if there are tens of millions of so-called assault rifles in circulation and many tens of millions of these so-called high-capacity magazines, you're never going to solve the problem that the left believes is responsible for gun violence unless you take those away, right?
It's the only logical conclusion. Because if you think about it, if you start with gun control based around the idea of restricting or taking something away, if we got rid of, let's say we got rid of the AR-15s, they account for less than 3% of gun deaths in this country. Right. So let's say we get an assault weapons ban, right? At that point, all right, let's say another shooting happens like the one we just had recently in California where he used a handgun. Then they'll be telling us, you know what, that didn't work, so now we need to do something more strict, which is ban firearms. So inevitably, it's always a race to total and complete confiscation, but they never want to admit that. They want to act like they're being reasonable and say, no. We just want to get rid of the big scary guns. But it's like, the big scary guns aren't the problem. They account for less than 3% of gun deaths. But 80% of gun deaths in this country are committed by way of handguns. So if you honestly believe that the tool is the issue, why aren't you addressing the handguns?
Well, that's a very smart point, and one that I plan to bring up next time we speak to someone on the other side. But my question's even broader than that. Why, in a chaotic and increasingly chaotic world, the one that we live in, would you want to disarm normal law-abiding people? What threat do they pose?
I think there are two different dynamics going on here. I think there's one dynamic which is composed of people who are just generally ignorant about firearms. And then I think there's another dynamic of people who are generally have an agenda to gain more control and to push the idea of reliance on government. And it sounds conspiratorial, but it's not. Because if I'm self-reliant in my ability to protect myself, my natural inclination is not to depend on the government to be there when something goes wrong. Right. And you can't push the necessity of government if you have a populace of people who understand and embrace the idea of self-reliance, especially when it comes to protecting your life and your family. And so the people on the side of the... Go ahead.
No, I'm just complimenting the point. It's deep. So what you're saying is that many people on the periphery of the conversation just haven't really thought about it, but the people who are driving the conversation, who have thought about it, do have an agenda.
Absolutely. Huh. It's one of those things where... Go ahead, sorry.
No, that's it. I'm just impressed. I hope you'll come back and join us again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Nancy Pelosi led the Democrats back to a majority in the House, almost 40 seats, but now she could be removed from power anyway by her fellow Democrats. That smells like sexism. We're sounding the alarm right now. We're going to talk to Richard Goodstein about it after the break. Took control, that time friend and defender of Bill Clinton, Harvey Weinstein, and Anthony Weiner. Gillibrand has recently been reborn as a fire-breathing fundamentalist preacher. Here's a selection from a few of her sermons over just the past week.
This country was founded on some basic moral principles, that we have a moral compass as a nation. Our morality as a country is literally on a knife's edge.
For me, it's really a moral question. For me, it's very much a moral question. I've been called to fight as hard as I possibly can to restore that moral integrity, that moral decency.
For me, it's a moral question. Keep in mind the hand gesture. Keep in mind also that Senator Gillibrand isn't just fighting for moral integrity and moral decency. She says she has been called to fight for these things. You know who called her, don't you? It wasn't her friend Anthony Weiner from the prison payphone. Nope. It was God himself. He calls Senator Gillibrand directly. He's got her cell. That's how close they are. Remember when Democrats used to say they worried about a theocracy? Who knew they'd try to start their own? Well, after 8 years, the minority Democrats are, as we said, back in control of the House. They may soon have a new leader of the House, the Speaker. A growing number of Democrats publicly voicing opposition to electing Nancy Pelosi to that job for another time.
One of the things that I talked about frequently on the campaign trail was the need to have new voices in Congress, the need to turn a new page.
We answer that call for new leadership by reinstalling the same status quo establishment leadership that we've had in this party since 2006, then we're letting down the American people.
I think once we show that the leader can't get to 218, you're going to see other people throw their hat in the ring, too.
Now, there are a lot of ways Pelosi could respond to that. The most obvious is by saying, look, we just won 39 seats in the House. Possibly we're going to get to 40. I did that. She could say that. Instead, she's crying sexism.
You'd have to ask those people what their motivation is. I think of the 17, it's mostly like 14 men who are on that letter. If, in fact, there is any misogyny involved in it, it's their problem, not mine.
Men. Toxic masculinity in the Democratic Party. Richard Goodstein, a living expert on this. No, just kidding. But he is an attorney and former advisor to both Bill and Hillary Clinton, joins us tonight. I didn't know, Richard, there was that much sexism in the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi says there is. What are you guys going to do about it?
Yeah, I was sorry to see Nancy Pelosi attribute these rebels to misogyny and sexism. I actually think she knows that's not what it is, that when Conor Lamb was running for election initially in that district in Pennsylvania that went for Trump by 20, and all these ads were being run saying he was just going to be a puppet of Nancy Pelosi's, guess what? He said he wasn't going to vote for her if he got elected to be Speaker. And you know what? He's not. It's not because she's a woman. It's because he made a commitment to his constituents, because he basically thought that's what he needed to do to, A, get elected, and B, what he thought was right, that the Democrats needed to turn the page.
Oh, so he just wants the most qualified candidate, irrespective of her sex. I can't let you off the hook that fast, Richard. These are the rules that you guys wrote, and the rules are as follows. The most important thing about you is how you're born, your sex, your race, your sexual preference, your innate qualities, your DNA. That's what defines you. It's called identity, Richard. I don't know if you knew that. In the intersectional world that you guys made, you can't just say, oh, we found a better candidate. You're blowing off a woman. 14 men are doing that. Is there an investigation into institutional sexism in the Democratic Party? I'm dead serious. Why wouldn't there be?
Yeah, here's what's worse. The problem for the Democrats, and I'm serious about this, has nothing to do with identity. It's with seniority. And they, I think, respect the fact that when Newt Gingrich came in, that the Republicans did something different. They basically said, we're going to put the sort of younger, vital, able, competent people in our leadership position at committee chairs, and Paul Ryan's a young guy. And I think that's something that, frankly, a lot of Democrats wish Democrats could figure out a way to embrace. It has nothing to do with Nancy Pelosi's gender or Congressman Clyburn's race. It has to do with the fact that, yes.
But everything outside the Democratic Party's leadership structure, according to Democrats, has to do with race and gender. Everything. I mean, every time I flip on the tube, there's some moron tugging his chin and saying, I don't see enough people of whatever in this picture. I mean, that is the most basic Democratic talking point. But we're not supposed to apply it to the Democratic leadership because why?
Well, again, I think the Democratic talking points are about health care, about making sure the tax cuts go to working people, about gun background checks, about infrastructure. That's what Democrats are united around.
Can they stop lecturing the rest of us about racism and sexism, since clearly they don't hold themselves to the same standard? That's all I'm asking for. By the way, I agree with, I hope the Democrats talk about health care. I think it's an important topic. I think we'd all benefit from that. Can they lay off the race and gender stuff a little bit, though, since they're obviously not playing by those rules?
Again, Republicans put Nancy Pelosi on the ballot, all these ads they ran against her. Donald Trump said himself he was on the ballot. And as you just said, Democrats picked up 39 seats, having nothing to do with race or gender, having to do with sort of a belief that, A, they needed an agenda that the Democrats supported, and B, frankly, to put a check on Donald Trump.
Wait, hold on. Wait, you just lied over it. Nothing to do with race or gender. Really? I mean, or gender, how do we know that? So here's what I know. Here are the stark facts of the case. Donald Trump is for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, but Seth Moulton is not. Trump is comfortable with a strong woman in power. Seth Moulton clearly isn't. Yeah. Seth Moulton looks like a sexist to me by this measure, and Donald Trump seems very enlightened. I mean, that's what I say. Why do you see something different?
You're assigning weight to what Donald Trump says. I think most Democrats, and frankly, most people in the country anymore, don't. With all due respect, they just don't assign weight to what he says.
Wait, he says
because
he's
so
for
many times he
Pelosi.
says
Okay, how
things
about
that
this?
aren't true.
I'm for Pelosi. Look, I'm just using the rules that you guys made up and enforce with Germanic efficiency on the rest of us. That's all I'm doing. And how does it feel? It feels bad because it's unfair and stupid, isn't it? Can you just admit that? It's unfair and stupid, and the rest of us have to live like this in fear. And maybe you guys should live that way just for a day to see what it feels like. Do you see what I mean?
Well, again, you're ascribing things that I think Democrats and the public generally, they wouldn't have voted in the Democrats to run the House if they accepted what your proposition, Tucker.
I guess. I don't know why they did. Richard Gustine, great to see you. Thank you. I don't think
pleasure.
you're a sexist. I was just kidding.
Thank you.
Well, the new face, the Democratic Party, just endorsed a plot to make the party even more liberal than it already is. Mark Stein joins us to assess what happened. Stay tuned. Newly elected Democratic Congresswoman and Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has quickly become one of the most famous Democrats in America at the age of 28. And sometimes, occasionally, it is clear that she's only 28, as here.
I would love to get inaugurated January 3rd, January 4th. We're signing health care, we're signing this, we're decarcerating our society.
And if we work our butts off to make sure that we take back all three chambers of Congress, all three chambers of government, the presidency, the Senate, and the House in 2020.
We look at these figures and we say, oh, unemployment is low, everything is fine, right? Well, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs.
Some missteps, but that does not mean she's not popular. She's very popular among the Democratic base, and she's determined to remake the party along very different lines. She just gave support to Justice Democrats. That's a group plotting primary challenges to Democrats they deem insufficiently progressive and insufficiently diverse. Author and columnist Mark Stein joins us, who I should say, in an editorial comment, is one of the single smartest people I've ever met in my life and who never went to college. So if you're thinking about whether to send your brilliant son or daughter off to school at $70,000 a year, look at Mark Stein and reconsider. Anyway, I couldn't control myself.
No, drop out at fifth grade, America. You'll thank me for it.
There's something to it. Anyway, that's another show. So the Democratic Party has a reckoning, it seems to me. They need to figure out who they are and what they stand for. What are they going to decide? Where are they going?
Well, I think they're going with Miss Ocasio-Cortez. You were talking with our pal Richard about identity politics, and there's actually something absurd about it. We had a fellow called O'Rourke pretending to be Hispanic, some kind of Hispanic.
You're talking about Beto.
Beto O'Rourke, pretending to be Hispanic. And essentially what you have permanently is extremely old white people.
Running against an actual Hispanic guy named Ted.
Yeah, but if you look at, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Bernie Sanders, Dianne Feinstein, and they're all about, as you said, they're all about the identity politics, saying, oh yeah, if you're a Muslima transgender, then Joe Biden is your guy, or Bernie Sanders is your guy. And at a certain point, these identity groups, like the youngest Congresswoman, decide, no, well, wait a minute, we'd like a piece of the action.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I have mixed feelings about this. I don't think that you should elevate people on the basis of irrelevant criteria like their race of all things. I think it's immoral, actually, no matter what the race is. On the other hand, they wrote these rules. And they don't want to live by these rules, but they want everyone else to live by the rules.
And they're being taken out by people who took them at their word, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, we can laugh at her. I thought that. I don't even know what 3 chambers of government mean. I do, because it's like if you're an immigrant, it's in the test. I think the 3 branches of government are the special counsel, the Broward County Elections Office, and the judge who gave Jim Acosta his press pass back. They're the 3 branches of government. But what's more interesting is not that she doesn't know that, but that millions and millions of Democrat voters don't think it's actually essential to know that. They're way beyond that now, and they have a new view of America, and she represents it. And fellas like Joe Biden and Bernie, Bernie does, but fellas like Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary, they really don't.
They're in for a real reckoning. I think they're about to find out that their dumb ideas have consequences that are going to hurt them. Mark Steyn, great to see you as always.
And you, Tucker.
A rare in-person setting. Who will be filling in, by the way, who's going to be hosting this show while I'm gone, and we're always grateful that he does.
Yeah, have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Up next, there's new scientific evidence of what you already knew. Facebook is making Americans miserable, depressed. What can we do about that? I'll tell you after the break. Their tech companies are hurting America and distorting our brains. A brand new study by psychologists at the University of Pennsylvania finds that Facebook, just Facebook, among many social media platforms, can substantially increase depression in people and loneliness, and these feelings go away when a person gets off Facebook. This should not surprise us. Just a year ago, early Facebook investor Sean Parker bragged that the company deliberately made the site as addictive as possible without caring at all about the harm it could inflict. Imagine if the tobacco chieftains admitted that. They'd be in prison, but they're walking free. Tom Kirsting is the author of the book Disconnected, How to Reconnect Our Digitally Distracted Kids, and he joins us tonight. Tom, I'm not going to ask if you're surprised by this, because I know that you're not, because you wrote a whole book on it. What is the answer for parents of teens, of young people who are watching their kids slip away, become remote and sad because of overuse?
Well, the number one advice I give when I'm lecturing on this topic is everybody is we've turned into a keeping up with the Joneses sort of society where everybody seems to be doing what everybody else is doing. So, for example, the average age that kids are getting their first smartphone is 5th grade. And I can ask any parent.
That's the average?
That's the average. The average child is in 5th grade is getting a smartphone that has all the social media and everything else on it. And if we ask anybody that's listening, do we think that's a good idea as parents? They're going to say no. Yet the majority of them are doing it anyway. And that's kind of a conformity sort of thing.
It is conformity. So maybe the first step is saying out loud what everybody suspects, which is this is destroying our society. It's making us dumb and sad.
It is. And as far as the depression component, all right, and I was happy to see a study come out because they're always looking for a study. And sometimes we need to look at common sense when we look around and we see what's happening.
Yes.
You know, the fact that the suicide rate among teenagers has gone up 70% since 2006. And all of the research behind that, the researchers...
Please restate that. 70% since 2006.
Since 2006.
Suicide rate among young people.
Among teenagers, yes. Has gone up 70%. And the researchers, although there's nothing to substantiate it yet, but the researchers are suggesting that that's because of social media. Because when you're on social media all the time, what are you craving? What are you looking? You're looking for feedback. You're looking to fill an internal sense of self from an external source. And self-esteem, joy, and happiness is an inside-out thing. It's never an outside-in thing. And that's where people are getting tangled up and they don't even realize it.
So the cigarette companies never killed that many teens, not even close, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it takes many years, right, to get sick from smoking. And yet they got hauled up and barbecued and basically federally regulated into near extinction because of the threat they posed to kids, but nobody's doing anything about this because why?
Well, again, it goes back to, there was a study that came out showing the dangers from the radiation from cell phones in California, all right? And when the Center of Disease Control came across a study that refused to release the findings, they had to go to state court in order to get the findings released. And we know what it's about. It's about big tech industry, all the money that's behind that, the lobbying, and everything that they're not thinking about the well-being of the human beings, they're thinking about their bottom line.
The people who should be raising alarm are so caught up hating Trump, it's like they're missing the story, which is this is wrecking our country. Tom, you've been a lonely voice on this subject.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
You'll come back once again. Great
I would
to
love
see
to.
you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Much more ahead, much more news. Breaking news from Washington after the break.